You're listening to the one-year anniversary episode of Vote Her In, a collaboration between two broads talking politics and author Rebecca Sive, where we look at the movement to elect our first woman president. Hello, everyone. This is Kelly. You are listening to Vote Her In, which is a collaboration between two broads talking politics and author Rebecca Sive, where we look at the movement to elect hopefully our first woman president, maybe at least our first woman vice president, and some issues that are surrounding that. For our 1-year anniversary of Vote Her In, I am joined by two people today, one of whom is my two broads talking politics co-host, Sophie. Hi, Sophie.
Hey, Kelly.
And, of course, also with us is Rebecca Sive. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi there.
So, Rebecca, I will turn it over to you now as we look at this sort of 1-year anniversary of this project we've been working on together and where we are in the state of electing our first woman president.
So good to be with both of you, Sophie. It's good to hear your voice. So, yeah, as Kelly mentioned, we thought it was a good sort of point at this first anniversary, number one, to kind of declare a victory for our bit of trying to share the news about women and inspire women to be active on candidates' behalf, but also to take a serious look at what looks like it may be ahead. You may remember that we took a look in late December in our last show of 2019 on what we had learned or thought we had learned in the series of interviews we did last year. And there was also an article summarizing those, which you can see at Demcast if you haven't yet, which I encourage everyone to take a look at in any event. But today we're at a point we're doing the show on the day of and after last night's yet again another debate, and we'll get to that shortly. But just to sort of give everyone a frame of reference and refresh everyone's memory, we've gone through 2 caucuses, 1 primary. We're a few days away from South Carolina's contest. Then we'll be at Super Tuesday, just a week out, followed by some of our personal favorite states, Michigan on March 10th, Illinois on March 17th, and of course Sophie's home state, Wisconsin, on April 7th. We kind of wanted to, I'll summarize here, what we think's been accomplished, notwithstanding however anyone may choose to vote, and we may talk about that a little bit more, or, you know, what we think some of the troubling aspects of all this have been, which we will also talk about. But I'm always sort of trying to look at the glass as being half full. As a community organizer, that's certainly how I was trained. So to summarize on that front, and not in order of importance, but in the order in which I thought about these issues, the first is, of course, that at no other time in American history have we had in a major political party primary more than one viable woman candidate. And of course, this year, over these last 12 months, there have been 6 women in the Democratic primary, 4 of whom have had very strong showings, and we still have 2 who are fighting hard and fighting smart. So that's number one. We've come a long way. The second thing that I was thinking about as we looked back at this past month of these 2 caucuses and primary is the fact that between them, Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar have won tens of thousands of votes. And so I don't think there can be a question here, and of course the polling data supports this, about the perceived legitimacy, if that's even a concept these days, for women to be in the race for president. What does seem to be the case is people fear, well, maybe she can't get elected, so therefore I couldn't vote for her. So we'll talk about that more, but let's not forget that these are the 2 choices that many, many people have made, and many more will make by the end of this next week. Another important point, and this doesn't speak to the merits of any particular candidacy or anyone's personal faves, But both Senator Warren and Senator Klobuchar have prevailed in a very tough competition when several of their Senate colleagues, male Senate colleagues, have not. And I point that out not as a judgment, but just to say that what we've celebrated and want to celebrate it again is just how tough and smart and disciplined and determined these women are, and therefore why we can be, in my view, confident about whatever they do going forward, not to say take a lesson from their playbooks about the grit that's required. The other thing related to this is, and we may get into this a bit more too, is the notion that in each case, in Senator Warren's and Senator Klobuchar's, they kind of have positioned themselves as a leader at a certain point on the spectrum of policy and politics and approach to governance. And I think that that's, again, not important so much as to the merits, because each of us will evaluate those policy positions or those political perspectives, but the fact that these women aren't, so to speak, lagging behind any of the other guys. If you want to talk about a position further to the left, you're going to talk about Elizabeth Warren. If you're going to talk about a position more to the center, you're going to talk about Amy Klobuchar. And in that context, of course, we had a few weeks ago an endorsement from the New York Times of both of them. And what I wanted to say about that for us to think on is that while I know I've talked to some people who see that as, so to speak, a cop-out, one person said to me, I was jumping up and down in my chair. Couldn't have dreamed of this, wouldn't have dreamed of it, it would have seemed foolish. But here we are saying you can vote for either one of these two fabulous women, and you, America, will do just fine. And then I guess the last sort of overarching declare a victory, as Saul Alinsky used to say, point is that regardless of what may roll out over the next couple months, and we have primaries until June, there is a victory for particularly Warren and Klobuchar, but I would say for all of the women who put themselves out there in setting the stage for their being looked at, if they want to be, as potential vice presidential candidates, certainly for other leading positions in a Democratic administration, not to mention the U.S. Supreme Court. And I would just say on this last point that lest anyone feels like they're too tired to continue, before you know it, there'll even be another presidential election upon us, and we will again want to work hard to elect pro-choice, pro-women candidates up and down the ballot. So I kind of think that factors into being grateful for everything that these women have done. That said, I thought we could kind of jump in and have this discussion, and hopefully for those of you who are listening, it'll provide a context for your own thinking and your own work in the weeks as we go forward. Just one other note on this. We're going to work hard to have a series of diverse and differing voices over the next couple months and on Voter In to talk about some of these issues. So you'll definitely want to keep your podcast tuned right here.
Yeah, so I think, one of the questions that you had posed to us in thinking about this episode was, if we were advising Senators Warren and Klobuchar in the run-up to Super Tuesday, what would we counsel for them? And I think what's instructive, for me at least, to think about is they've both had sort of breakout moments in the past month or so. And, what is it that made each of them have those breakout moments and do better? For Klobuchar's case, it do better in the New Hampshire primary than people were expecting. And for Warren, she's had this tremendous fundraising push over the past week or so. And, I think for both of them, it was, sort of really standing up, showing that they could be fighters. I think that in a lot of ways is what people are looking for right now. And it's such a fraught thing for women to be able to do, for women candidates, to be fighters. But people have responded very well to that in both of their cases. And that may be, in some cases because of the moment we're in, people want to know that the candidate we choose can fight back against Donald Trump and the whole Republican Party establishment. But it has, there's certainly backlash. There are people that don't like it when Warren is feistier. But for everyone who doesn't like it, there are certainly lots of people who are then cheering her on. And so that seems to be, we're just at a moment in this primary that nobody can sort of slink back and try to be, sort of the adults in the room or something. That what everyone seems to want is someone who's really willing to fight, put their voice out there, to push. And so that's what I would encourage both of them to be doing in this lead up.
So I agree, and I would actually go further and say outright, feel free to be angry.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I saw that was so striking in the Nevada debate was that both of the televised moments, the moments that went viral, were one of them was a moment with Elizabeth Warren and one of them was a moment with Amy Klobuchar. And the Elizabeth Warren moment was a moment when she clearly got pissed off at Michael Bloomberg and just let him have it. And then the Amy Klobuchar moment was the moment where Pete Buttigieg was criticizing her for having forgotten the name of a world leader on television. And she said, "Are you calling me stupid?" And she was clearly really angry. And I contrast that thinking back to long ago when it was 2016. Does everybody remember how calm Hillary Clinton was on stage with Donald Trump? Like I was yelling at him for her, but she would just like smile and be relaxed and calm. And I'm thinking about like how she must have been so angry inside that like this complete lunatic who is so unqualified is standing on the stage next to me, a person who is so much smarter, better qualified, and better at doing this than he is. And yet she had to keep it so calm, she couldn't be quote unquote shrill or quote unquote bitchy. And I feel like watching Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar work, I think the anger is kind of the key. I think there's so much anger in the electorate right now, particularly from women and people of color, about the ways in which we have been doing the hard work of activism and yet not seeing results from it for ourselves. I think there's a lot of anger right now, and I think that if they tap into that, that can be really, really powerful.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, Sophie. Obviously, you've probably seen these too. There have been some articles on this point saying that is America or American women, more to the point, ready for an angry president? And one of the things I've always said, and I want to get to the Clinton example, is you have to confront, and when the timing is right and when the circumstances require it. And the worst anyone can say about you is, well, she was angry and pushy. Well, she was angry and pushy on behalf of something really important, right? Which is what you're saying here. I've thought about this in the context of, as you're pointing out, of what happened with Hillary Clinton in 2016. And the challenge there is, perhaps in some of these close races, maybe Michigan will be one, maybe Wisconsin will be one, we don't know. What are your thoughts, Kelly and Sophie, about, if you were there as a voter and you were organizing women in one of those states, what's the message you'd like to hear from, Senator Warren or Senator Klobuchar that would just get everyone out?
I would want to hear that this is pretty much the message that they have been sending, that that they are not just fighters, not just mad, but are fighting for us. And I think that has been what has been so effective about Warren's message the whole time that she's been running, is she's brought it back every time to, maybe the economy is working for some people, but is it working for you? How do we make sure that the economy is working for everybody? I think Amy Klobuchar talks a lot about things like mental health, and are these things working for you, the voter, the person on the ground? And I want to be fighting, not because I want, that fancy house in DC, not because I want, the fancy pen I get to sign laws with, but because I want to help you and I want to make your life better. And I think that that's an argument that women can make very powerfully because that's what women do in general, is fight for people and is help people, and you think about, women doing this as moms and grandmas, as teachers, as lawyers, and so I think that they can make that really compelling argument. And I think that that really gets voters motivated.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And I think really to put the emphasis on, what you said, Kelly, that some people say that this is working, but it's not working for you. And I can see that because I think there's a big sort of energy in the Midwest right now of feeling left behind. I think that's been happening for like the past 20 or 30 years, particularly in Rust Belt areas where people feel like, okay, the rest of the world is doing fine, but everybody's forgotten about my little town in the Midwest. Everybody's forgotten about us and we're not doing so well. And I think speaking to those people and saying, you know what? All these people in Washington are saying, oh, the economy is so great. But is it? Because you're not doing well, because farmer suicides are at an all-time high in Wisconsin. So obviously, things are not going well for you. Tell me more about how I can help you. I think that's a really effective message to say, I see you. Even though other people might be doing fine, I see you and I care about you.
Right. One of the things I talked a lot about this in my book, Voter In, was the importance of, and lots of other people, of course, have talked about this too, about building alliances among women across class and race lines, and in order to get what we need, in order to be helped in the way that we need to be. And, it's an ongoing challenge. There is still data about, I don't know how good it is, and we'll see as the race unfolds, about white women not favoring a Democratic candidate necessarily. I think it's sort of too early to be dispositive about that. But I do think that we're seeing, a lot of women vote for the male candidates in this race. There's at least so far, and that may continue to be true. So one of the questions that's come up in these last few days prominently in the press is whether it's time for either Warren or Klobuchar or both of them to quit the presidential race. And needless to say, I'm not speaking to the merits of that idea at all. But as politicians, of course, they have to consider what they're hearing from the media and otherwise, and how they preserve their brand, so to speak, and their point of view. And I've sort of thought it might be fun for us to think about this because it doesn't often happen for sort of everyday people. Well, I got to quit this job. No, we just put our heads down, and keep trying to work harder. But say Kelly, say you were in Senator Klobuchar's shoes or Senator Warren's shoes, neither of whom has won so far, and both of whom have a big challenge ahead of them in South Carolina. How would you evaluate that matter of, let me quit while I'm ahead and try to position myself, for instance, say, to be VP?
Yeah, I think the answer's different for the two of them, not so much because of their standing in the polls or anything like that, but because of the lanes that they inhabit. Because the moderate lane is so much more crowded right now in this race, I think that if I were Senator Klobuchar, I would think seriously about whether people, rightly or wrongly, think that she is standing in the way of a moderate gaining consensus, and then, a lot of people really want somebody to beat Bernie, and, so because she's in that more crowded lane, if she is in the way of that, it's possible that would sort of hurt her brand at some point, that maybe she stayed in the race too long. We can debate all day whether that is actually true or not, whether that game theory makes sense, but I think that there's a perception of that. And so if she, let's say, were to leave the race and endorse Joe Biden, who seems like, of the moderates, maybe the one who could pull it off, maybe that does give her, whether a VP spot for him or somewhere in his cabinet, I could see that being very valuable for her. I'm not sure that there's as much of an argument for Senator Warren to drop out because I'm not sure what it gets her, and I'm not sure that it helps this project that everyone wants to beat Bernie, because I think if Warren drops out, half her voters might go to Bernie, and then that actually helps him. So, I don't know that it positions her quite as well, and that maybe staying in the race and being the fighter, the person to take down Bloomberg is what positions her better for, a VP slot or a position in a cabinet, or just, being able to stay in the Senate and do good work there. So I don't necessarily think it's the same answer for both of them, but I do think that it's something they need to be thinking about seriously. I don't want them to drop out of the race. I said the other day, like, my choices 2 through 8 have already dropped out, and, I don't want more of my first place choices to drop out. But I think it's something that they need to consider, especially if there is widespread panic, rightly or wrongly, about Bernie getting the nomination.
See, this is interesting. I agree with you that it's different for both of them, and I agree it's because of the lanes, but my conclusion is the opposite. That because the moderate lane is so crowded, I'm not sure who Amy Klobuchar would know to endorse or to negotiate with. Whereas Elizabeth Warren, clearly she's aligned on the left with Bernie, and so she could go to Bernie and say, hey, if I drop out, can you guarantee me X, Y, Z? And then that materially helps Bernie. If Amy drops out, it's not entirely clear to me who that helps. Does it help Bloomberg? Does it help Biden? Does it help Buttigieg? And so for her, it's going to be a lot harder to figure out who are you negotiating with. Are you going to go to all three of them and say, if I drop out, will any of you give me this? I mean, for her, I think that would be a harder decision. So for me, I think
that is they're both really smart analyses. I agree with pieces of both. I would add one other thing to this, I guess, from the vantage point of my own involvement going back a ways. One of the most important things that happened for African Americans in presidential primaries was, of course, the fact that Jesse Jackson stayed in. And he stayed in, and he ran again 4 years later. And my recollection, I don't have these numbers in front of me, is that at the end of the Democratic primaries, I think in the second campaign, he had received 20% or so of people's votes. That was enormous. That had never happened before. It showed the strength of him personally, but certainly of an African-American candidate and their viability. And, I think that that's an instructive lesson for both senators as we are in this place this year and go forward. I wanted to turn for a minute to this point about the vice presidency and talk quickly about that, and then I think we're going to want to close today's episode with a little bit of inspirational what's next to do discussion. But, obviously there's been lots of discussion in this whole context about some people saying that a woman vice presidential candidate is really important, others saying not so much. Certainly Stacey Abrams put herself right out there a couple of weeks ago saying she'd be happy to be the VP candidate with anyone. Kamala Harris has been significantly more circumspect. But then, of course, if it's the case, as we've just discussed, there are other women who could be considered for that spot, not only Senator Warren and Senator Klobuchar, but certainly, other members of the Senate or governors. That spot has a history of being considered by presidential candidates for a range of people. So I just was curious about kind of what you're hearing, so to speak, on your respective streets about this aspect of things.
Well, Rachel Bidikofer has said that she thinks that Stacey Abrams should be the VP pick for any of them who are left. And, I can definitely see that. I love Stacey Abrams. I think she is incredibly inspirational. I think her, as Rachel Bidikofer says, her charisma is just extra. Like, it's hard to even measure. But, I don't know I think that would make a lot of sense. I think that would be a good pick. She certainly has the chops of being out there doing the work. And so I think that would be good. I think that a lot of the so-called K-Hive, the Kamala supporters, still have not settled on a candidate. They're sort of reluctantly deciding to vote for someone, some of them Warren, some of them Biden. And I think that you could get an awful lot of them really excited, and a lot of them are, people who are happy to give a lot of money and do a ton of work. And so I think, Kamala could be a very strategic pick, across the board as well. And I think, it helps that California is a pretty safe place for us to be taking a senator out of. We're not going to have to worry about losing that Senate seat. It'll still go to a Democrat. So I think in that case, Kamala might be a really good pick, although she'd be an excellent attorney general too, if that was a thing she was interested in doing in the future. So I could easily see either one of them. And I think, I'm going to be deeply uncomfortable if the Democratic ticket is all white. And so I think that, in that case, both of them would help with that issue as well. I think that, as much as I would love to see Warren as VP if she is not president, I do think that taking somebody in Massachusetts where there is a Republican governor and, we could at least short term end up with a Republican senator in that seat, I think could be kind of risky. So, I think we need to think about those sorts of issues as well. But, I'm all for the Stacey Abrams or Kamala Harris as a VP to literally anybody.
Well, I'm fairly sure that in Massachusetts, you actually have to have a special election. They're not gubernatorially appointed.
Yeah, but there'd be a few month gap at least while there was an appointed person.
So I wanted to say here that I saw a data point earlier today and in another context, which I think is important to what we're doing here and to what all our listeners are doing. It was about the fact that in the last few years, I forget the actual time period, only 14% of any exhibits in major museums were of women artists. And so that made me think about political pundits, who of course are overwhelmingly male as well and overwhelmingly white. So I wanted to say to our listeners that while the three of us don't pretend to be totally knowledgeable on this subject, I think it's really important for us to have this conversation among ourselves, among women who do pay attention, who do care, and who are thinking hard about this. And so that's the context in which we had this discussion today. And I just wanted to close it with the notion that, of course, the most important thing for us all to do is to stay mobilized. There's an argument for focusing on whatever candidate matters the most to you, or if not, playing the odds. I've started getting phone calls from friends asking me about that because they don't want to waste their time or their vote. But what we do want to say to you here is just please stay mobilized, active, do everything you can. Kelly and Sophie, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is something we'll be returning to for sure, but I think it's also important for people to remember that as important as the top of the ticket is, it's not the only part of the ticket.
Right.
And so, if in the end your favorite candidate is not the nominee, and that will certainly be the case for some percentage of the people listening here, that, find a down ballot race that is exciting to you. Right. Find a woman running for state legislature or governor or something that you're really excited about and passionate about, and go out and knock on doors and increase turnout for that down ballot candidate will also increase turnout for up ballot. So you can go out there and be motivated whether or not the actual presidential nominee is the one who inspires you.
I agree, and I want to put in a plug as well for pacing yourself. I see a lot of people that I know who got active in politics post 2016 who went a little crazy for the midterms, really got into it and burned themselves out, and now are feeling horribly guilty. It's okay to sometimes not be able to take on everything. I find it more helpful to sort of budget out my time and say, okay, I will write this number of postcards every week and no more. I will donate this amount of money every month and no more. I will canvass this number of times and no more. And that way sort of set yourself limits so that you have, because this is not actually a sprint. This is going to be a marathon. You know, the 2020 election is not the end of politics. And we have to keep doing this literally for the rest of our lives. So I really suggest remembering that you sometimes need to leave yourself a little strength or as the internet likes to say, a few more spoons for later on down the road. So feel free to set some boundaries for yourself.
So I would just close by saying I heartily agree with both Kelly and Sophie. I would say, I guess, that I do think that 2020, at least in my lifetime, which is a long one at this point, more important by far than any other election I've ever seen. So I kind of have tried to take for myself, and obviously you have to give yourself time to rest, but take for myself this notion that we do have to fight as hard as we can and work as hard as we can this year for the sake of everybody, and not to be corny, but certainly for the least among us in particular. So on the note that we're all in this together, we're all going to take care of each other. And on this first anniversary of Voter In, thank you all for listening in. Please do send us your thoughts about what we're doing and how we should do it, and we'll just move along. So thanks to everyone.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening, off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.